unmute myself now. Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm so excited to have helped put this together with our colleagues in the School of Public Health, and welcome all of you. I know we had 190 people registered today, and I hear a lot of people dinging on right now, so welcome. This is one of our first, I guess, things that we'll be doing this way in a virtual environment, and then we're calling it Cardinal Conversations. So I guess this is our first in an ongoing series of virtual engagement chats with alumni and friends. So thanks for joining today about a conversation that you'll be hearing, and I will be jumping out of the way quickly to make sure that we're giving all the time to our speakers and for you guys to really engage and ask questions. So this is today, our run of show will be lots of time at the end. And as I said, we had a lot of you who not only registered and submitted questions in advance, but also can submit questions in the chat, and we'll come back to those toward the end. So this is about today, the crisis and legacy of our reckoning once again with racism in our country and how it relates to public health. So simultaneously during a global pandemic, we're grappling with this legacy of systemic racism. And we know that there's a lot that we need to navigate together in the future. Just yesterday, President Bindapudi announced a Cardinal anti-racism agenda, and this is a challenge to all of us inside the university and in the community to intentionally act against racism. And your feedback and ideas are really critical in that process, and we would invite you again to submit your ideas and your thoughts online. So a link for that input mechanism is being dropped in the chat right now, so you can even click on that after this call, and we'll be continuing to share those resources in the chat today. And I thank you all for being here just to be a part of this conversation. We're so fortunate to have so many community leaders, alumni, and friends of the university who are committed in building truly healthy systems. And we thank you for continuing to be committed to advancing the health and well-being for everyone in our local and really even our global communities. So with that, I'm going to introduce and turn this over to Dean Blakely. We are joined by not only Dean Blakely, the School of Public Health and Information Sciences Dean, but key faculty and researchers who are absolutely on the ground in this field working, and will be able to talk in a really detailed way. And I know just from the reading that I've already had of their work, I feel like I've already gained knowledge that I would have never been exposed to. So thank you so much for that. And with that, welcome Dean Blakely, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Angela. Let me begin framing this conversation by suggesting this will not be a casual conversation. We're now in a place where the very idea that we are doing things for our community and neighbors is being attacked as threatening individual liberties. Thus, let me say just up front that we Americans are so full of our cherished personal liberties that we may be the single country on the 2020 globe least capable of grasping the true sense of the common good. To be sure, these are unusual times. A global pandemic like no other in the last century, a related worldwide economic downturn like we've not seen in 90 years, and racial tensions that we've been manufacturing for the last 400 years, unless you want to draw the start line in this geographic global sector at 1492. At face value, the question of whether racism is a public health issue, I see that as a simple yes. While I freely admit my biases when I draw my Venn diagram of what is public health, I have a hard time thinking of what goes on the outside. If you wish to constrain that diagram by suggesting the outcomes of interest in public health are creating the conditions under which people can be healthy, then I simply say social determinants: housing, jobs, transportation, education, the list goes on. All contribute to positive gains in health. All are the focus of the centuries of systemic policies in this country designed to constrain the viability of being Black or of color in America. Each decade, our country sets new national health goals. The last 3 decades, racial, ethnic disparities in health status have been overarching national goals. In those 3 decades, we have made trivial progress in achieving those goals. Right here in River City, the largely African-American pool of residents in West Louisville live on average 12 years less than those of us in the rest of the city. I struggle to come up with a more embarrassing statistic. Now we share the national stage with Minneapolis, Atlanta, Portland, and a few other locales, and and demonstrate for all the world to see why things are so screwed up, a lack of leadership. For far too long, we have let major uprisings like those occurring on our streets today fester for a period and then allow the old normal to return. I hear many saying, this time feels different. I think that's a racist posture. They need to be saying, here is what I am going to do to contribute to make certain this time is different. Yesterday, leadership at the local Chamber of Commerce in the local newspaper called for an increased police presence downtown for the enforcement of existing laws to protect local business interests. The comments were made in reference to preparations for the potential community response to the State Attorney General's investigation. While the Chamber clearly represents the business community, nowhere was there recognition of the total lack of policy protecting the rights of Black Americans. The piece clearly painted a picture of expectations that the outcomes of the investigation will fall short of appeasing the protesters. Well, let's frame that a little bit differently. Without recognizing the existence of institutional racism, the Chamber is charting a very narrow focused agenda that is short-sighted and basically contributing to the problem. While I do not condone the destruction of property, white or Black owned, the notion of common good is bigger than the business owners in downtown Louisville. We need strong, constructive leadership. I can no longer use the word compassionate in my community. It is too tarnished. We need everyone engaged in pushing for true change. If I can wrap up my introductory comments by quoting Colleen Cipriani from the North Carolina School of Public Health, speaking at a similar link to the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health, she called on us to abandon compliance and complicity in favor of disruption and deconstruction. We suffer, in my opinion, from a paucity of audacity. It's time to make some change. We have two excellent speakers or discussants today. One is a senior faculty member, the other a seasoned doctoral student just about to cross the finish line. They actually are an excellent example of mentor-mentee dyad. I asked both for comments they would like me to share about them. Monica, the senior of the two, the mentor, knows me well and provided a brief set of bullets. She then advised her mentee that he would benefit from providing me some detail rather than leaving me on my own inclinations. We'll see how that works out. Monica Wendel, what to say? I'll pull a few excerpts from her bullets, but here are the simple titles. Professor, Associate Dean for Public Health Practice, Department Head, Executive Director of the Commonwealth Institute of Kentucky, a policy action group that's generated more than $15 million in project work the last few years. PI, one of 6 CDC-funded youth violence prevention research centers. Mom, spouse, not necessarily in that order. Monica grew up in Texas and brings all those exposures to who she is. I met her in the early 2000s. She was an MPH student at Texas A&M School of Public Health. She was hired to help run the school's CDC Violence Prevention Research Center and part-time completed her doctoral degree while doing that. When I was offered the job here as dean, I tossed a deal breaker on the table. Monica comes with me. Of course, she didn't know about that at the time, but the good news was she visited the community and committed to coming. The rest is now something we can be proud of. She's now been here 6 years. That just makes me feel old. But Monica is someone who can get dropped into a critical discussion cold and emerge with a vision and great consensus. She grasps issues, even abstract community issues, quickly and finds a roadmap to progress. And she works with an incredible group of community scholar activists and residents who cannot help but guide her on her way. Social justice has tweaked her interests since her undergraduate days. Now as a public health academic, she continues to build on that social justice foundation to advance health equity. Trinidad Jackson, here is an excerpt of what he suggested I share with you by way of introduction. As a senior researcher for the University of Louisville School of Public Health, Mr. Jackson's research and action involved the spectrums of power, equity, and initiatives that aim to protect, preserve, and uplift terrorized communities. Trinidad is from St. Louis and has been active across the globe in efforts to combat structural violence and generate healing, socio-political action, and liberation. Jackson is currently engaged in statewide leadership and fellowship and addresses climate and justice issues in a number of areas and has been recognized with several local awards this past year. He closed with Black Lives Matter. Here are my continuing thoughts. Trinidad I inherited, but I'm so glad I did. Trinidad, I am hoping will be completing his doctoral studies in weeks now. While Monica took some somewhat slower path to her doctoral degree by working full-time and doing her studies part-time. Trinidad, you might say, took the I got no white privilege route. I heard him talk about his family history and the systemic barriers that slowed his progress. When we first met, he had struggled with some family demands that overtly interfered with his progress. Leadership on my arrival sought to dismiss him from the program for extended absence, not for failed work product. A superficial look at his status at the time painted a simple picture. A 5-minute conversation with Trinidad left me a true believer in his convictions, his values, his potential, and his capacity to succeed. The only thing I've done to contribute to his success is to reject those dismissal documents and give him another chance. To his credit, that's all he needed. Oh, I did push him to join Leadership Louisville a couple of years ago, but that had a lot less to do with how it might be good for him than it was my belief that Leadership Louisville needed a dose of Trinidad Jackson. It occurred to me to say that I'm excited to see who he becomes, but I think that's a poor characterization of the man. I already know who he is. I'm truly excited to see what he does with who he is. You will all be hearing from Trinidad Jackson. So I am confident that Monica and Trinidad will leave you with some different ways of looking at race, racism, and anti-racism, all framed in a public health paradigm. Each will provide some opening remarks, and then we'll, as we've noted, pull questions from both those that you've sent along earlier and those that you send through our Zoom chat function. So feel free to send those questions at any time that they occur to you. We mean for this to be an informative piece for alumni, but as Angela noted, interest is expanded, so we're glad to expand our conversation. We hope that this exchange of ideas will help us advance equity, inclusion, and social justice in our communities, and thank you for joining us. Monica, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks. So I thought that I would start, just because I know that everybody who's participating doesn't necessarily have a background in public health, and talking about why systemic racism is in public health's lane. Why is this something that public health should be talking about, should be addressing, kind of how does it fit in? And so I just wanted to give a quick idea, and if you want more in depth, you can definitely read more in depth. There's a statement that we issued yesterday that I think they're going to drop a link to in the chat that is both more in depth and also has a lot of background documents if you're interested in looking at that. But just to give everybody an idea, when we look at public health and the kinds of things that public health is about, public health is looking at preventing unnecessary illness, suffering, and death. And that should be enough to say why racism is in our lane, because that's what we're about. But if you look at the way that public health has done that and the way that we have framed what we do, for a long time we looked at individual behavior. Right? So if you're looking at a particular health issue, for example, one of the leading causes of death is heart disease, right? And we know all of these risk factors for heart disease. And so public health's way of intervening was to say, you need to eat more vegetables and less cholesterol, and you need to eat less sugar, and you need to eat less salt and less fat, and right? And you need to exercise more. Very much focusing on what the individual did and needed to do in order to achieve an outcome. What public health didn't really acknowledge at that time was that a lot of people don't have the option to eat healthier food. They don't have the option to exercise outside. They don't have the option to have less stress or to get enough sleep or to do all of these things. And so in the late 1980s, public health really started to make a shift. And that shift was to look at the big social determinants of health, looking at the factors beyond just the individual that influence the kind of choices that individuals have. So not just focusing on the choices that you're making that produce a particular health outcome, but the choices that you have that then determine choices that you can make. And so if we're talking about looking at what those factors are in public health, then we start talking about social determinants of health. And so you hear that used a lot. And those social determinants of health are the determinants of all of the outcomes, right? And so if you look at what is a risk factor for any particular leading cause of death, you are likely to find a really similar series of things, like poverty, like poor access to education, like poor access to economic opportunity, like family disruption, like community disorganization, right? And so there's a lot of those, like poor access to safe and healthy housing, right? There's a lot. But those then are risk factors for a whole host of poor outcomes. And by addressing those factors, right, then we're not just addressing heart disease. We're not just addressing cancer. We're not just addressing stroke. We're not just addressing hypertension. Because by addressing those social determinants, then we're lowering risk for everything, right? If we make those things better, then it actually results downstream in better health outcomes altogether. Okay, so all of this fits together then in this conversation about racism, because racism, and I'm not talking about individual racism, people using the N-word, right? I'm talking about structural racism. I'm talking about entrenched in the way that we think, in the way that we make assumptions about people and why they do what they do, and how we attribute meaning to people's behavior, to people's speech, to people's actions, in the way that our policies are written, in the way that our policies are enacted, in the ways that our policies are enforced, right? I'm talking about the racism that permeates every aspect of American life. Okay, that is a structural determinant. So from a public health perspective, we have these social determinants, right? And Craig mentioned housing and education and economics and transportation, all of these things. So if we go upstream, racism is a structural determinant of those social determinants. So it is a determinant of the determinants, which means that if we go upstream and we address structural racism, right? If we improve that, then it improves all the social determinants, which improves all the health outcomes downstream. And so one of the things that public health has traditionally been about is going upstream. How do we look at prevention? How do we look at intervention to make things better, not just by treating symptoms, right? And so you can see somebody who's suffering from food insecurity and connect them with a food bank. Do they need that immediately? Absolutely. Is that an important function of public health? Absolutely. But if we don't resolve the issue that they're living in a food desert and they don't have access to healthy food, that's not just their issue. That is an issue for all of the people in that community, and sending one person to the food bank isn't resolving that. And so there have to be systemic structural changes that public health is also working towards. At the same time that we're making sure that somebody has food to eat today, we also have to be making sure that that community has access to healthy food for a lifetime. And so as we're talking about kind of where this falls in public health's lane, you know, racism has been that structural determinant since the beginning of public health. Public health is just in the past maybe 10 years really starting to bring that conversation from the margins into the center of what we're doing, and it's about time. I'll pass it to Trinidad.
What's up, good people? We get to talk about racism today. I get to sit with two esteemed white leaders and talk about racism. Get a load of that. Dr. Monica Wendel and Dean Craig Blakely. We might be getting somewhere after today. And despite my tone, I'm not being facetious. I'm hopeful that, you know, as an institution, as a community, as a nation, as a globe, we will be able to prioritize the humanization of a group of people that have been for millennia detonated, annihilated, damaged consistently, right? And this isn't just history. We're talking about today, July 29th, 2020. What did it take for this conversation to be commissioned today? I can go down the line on how many years, how many rooms, how many spaces that I have been in, busting out windows, kicking down doors, saying this is priority. This isn't just my lived experience. This is a mass of people. And also, I can go down the line of how many times my experience, my work has been structurally marginalized, how it has been minimized in these very academic spaces, in community spaces, in many other spaces. And so it is critical, as President Bendapudi puts out a statement saying that, you know, it is our charge to be a leading premier anti-racist research institution, that is not met with just conversation. The community, Black, colored, white, etc., we are tired of narratives. We are tired of empty promises, and a statement with that amount of magnitude coming from an institutional president with that type of charge, it can result in consequential damage to the community if yet again we have institutions making declarations about what they're going to do to intervene in our communities with our lived experiences and nothing happens. So it is critical that everyone on this call, and as we continue to have commissioned conversations about race, it is critical that we are engaging in the immediacy of the actions that are necessary to move us forward at all levels of ecology. And so what I want to do as part of this conversation is bring in some voices, because again, they're for millennia, right? We've been fighting for human rights, for justice, for equity, whether it's been called those things or not. And so I want to bring in the voice of Amos Wilson and read an excerpt that he wrote in 1990. An act has a past and a future. It is not contained within the skin of its time of occurrence. Like a rock thrown in a placid lake, its effects flow beyond its point of impact and ripple across the surface of time and place, unsettling things both near and far removed. An act is concerted. It flows from generation to generation into generations yet unborn. Its explosion creates a universe ever expanding, its momentum radiating concentrically throughout infinity until counteracted by nullifying counterforces. An individual act of sin is always communal. It is always paid for, sometimes by the sinner, always by others. Others good and bad, righteous and unrighteous. For ultimately an act of sin is impersonal. It rains on the just as well as on the unjust. The sins of the fathers are visited unto the fourth generation. The children must pay for the sins of their fathers, for such sins are their inheritance. For they were fathered by sin, and in accepting the bequeathed bounty of their sinful fathers, they, at one and the same time, accept the curses of that inheritance. For with the goods of sin comes evil corrupting and destroying those who would be good, for he is not truly good and innocent who eats of food poisoned by sin, even if he eats them in ignorance of their deadly nature. For the wages of sin is death. For children of evil fathers must atone the sins of their fathers if they and their children and their children's children are to escape the wrathful judgment which surely must come. The sin of one is the sin of all, of the dead, of the living, and of the people. We are living in that wrathful judgment as we look at what has transpired as a result of Breonna Taylor's death, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, David McAtee, Tyler Girth. And the unfortunate thing is these critical moments in 2020, this is a novel space for us. This isn't foreign to us, right? In 2013, we had Trayvon Martin, and that sort of, woke the nation up. We had a couple of elder Black activists, saying, hey, be peaceful. Let's hold hands. Let's sing, we shall overcome. Let's march, right? That following year, we had Mike Brown, shook the consciousness of not just St. Louis, not just the country, but that was another global response to so much structural violence that we have been living with and perpetuating within our individual spaces as well as within our institutional spaces, right? So the globe responded to that. And thereafter, we had Baltimore uprising. We can go and name a number of cities that after Mike Brown, they all uprise, and there was a number of different types of violences that manifested. And it died down. Now in 2020, we have what I just explained once more. The difference is what I see in the hope and the opportunity. So I see dollars being shifted in 2020. I see statements being made. I see dollars associated with the statements. I see policy changing. We had Couture Heron, the policy strategist of the ACLU, in a matter of weeks, worked with Metro Council to pass Breonna's law, right? That against no-knock warrants. That's policy. So statements coupled with funding priorities, coupled with policies, those things have to be in every conversation that we commission. So how are Dean Blakely, Wendel, priorities, conversations, and policies as it relates to this lived experience of structural racism? I think it's critical that as we are arriving at a space where we're having so many conversations now about race and racism, that we actually understand that there are multiple levels and they all are important. Monica mentioned in the last 10 years, public health has been beginning to attempt to prioritize, racism. And so within that same sphere, within the public health domain, 20 years ago in the year 2000, Dr. Kamara Jones came out with a seminal piece on racism within public health, and she defined it within a public health context, and she identified 3 levels, one being internalized, so the acceptance of negative messages about our own individual as well as our collective abilities, and believing that. And a personal racism, so the differential assumptions and actions that occur between persons of different races. And then the institutionalized racism, so where we can identify disparate treatment and different outcomes based on the different sectors of care and of life that we have to engage in. Additionally, what Monica talked about so well was the structural piece. And so that's the cumulative, the generational aspect of all of the levels. So everything that we've been dealing with since the transatlantic slave trade, all of that is compounded as structural racism. And so it's important because as we talk about shifting funding priorities, conversations, and policy, we have to look at the individual level and say, okay, for example, when we talk about this fallacy of Black on Black crime and how inherently dangerous and violent the Black community is, how much of that is a function of internalized racism? And what is the white populaces, right? White populace, white institution, white funding, how much responsibility needs to account for violence at that interpersonal level? And what do interventions look like around radical healing at that level of racism, right? So at each level, we must engage in critical analyses of how the function of structural racism and white supremacy has further perpetuated each level and identify interventions at each level. We cannot move forward with this conversation without mentioning Breonna Taylor, right? Again, at the center of attention, at the center of global action, we have a Black woman who was murdered in her sleep. We have her significant other who was traumatized by the situation, who was immediately charged for murder, attempted murder of a police officer. But the regime of police violated their human rights, yet the two Black persons are the ones who have been engaged with death and criminality, while the structural and the cultural perpetrators that are the three police officers, the mayor's office, and so many other administrative actors within these structural spaces led by their cultural belief, they're off scot-free right now, right? So we have Craig mention, you know, the GLI declaring statements of preserving buildings, preserving business, and we're doing all of that over the humanization of Black bodies, over the humanization of Black lived experience. And so as long as that is priority, we will continue to resist, to disrupt and destroy the concept, the function of white supremacy as it pervades in every one of our spaces that we have to navigate. So we can go through a number of sectors. We can talk about food, we can talk about economics, we can talk about the justice system, we can talk about environmental perspective. Just years ago, the American Synthetic Rubber Company, for example, located in Rubbertown, west end of Louisville, petitioned to have some of their pollution standards relaxed. The community uprised, said, no, we've already been dying for decades. This is cancer cluster. There's data to show you, right? Since all of your decisions are data driven, there's data to show that the existence of this entity in our community is killing us. And so please hear us out, right? We had Representative Attica Scott. We had a number of community members act legislatively as well as at the community level to petition. And what happened? What do you think happened? The board approved their request. But we have to deal with how these toxins that are being facilitated in the West End impact us psychoneurologically, right? So all of the different chemicals such as lead that we are consuming, right, that we're breathing in every day. And then when we pair that with lead poisoning and what lead poisoning is associated with from a psychoneurological and behavioral perspective, right? Manifestations of lead poisoning are illustrated in ways that align with mental illness, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, depression, oppositional defiant disorder. And what do you know? These are the same labels that are placed onto our kids who are impacted by the school to prison pipeline, right? So we have kids from the West End who are engaged, who are attempting to engage in an educational space, yet because of the poisons that they are receiving from the government and from the structural and cultural violence, they're going to, in these educational spaces, cognitively damaged. And so as they manifest these behavioral symptoms, right, we have our educators responding to them in ways that say, you're a misfit for this class, you have to be excluded, right? You have to get a psychological evaluation. You have to be suspended. You have to be expelled. And so as we engage them in these psychological evaluations, they're labeled with these diagnoses, assigned as mental illness, and we're not accounting for the root of some of that function of the mental illness, right? Which is the poison, the systemic poison that for generations we've been subjected to. This is all policy, right? It was policy when we, for example, if we move to the sector of justice and police, it was policy for slave patrols, which are now our modern day police officers. It was policy for them to control the movement of, for them to terrorize and murder Black and indigenous communities without consequence. That was policy. It was policy, governmental and economic sector policy for Blacks to be excluded from the housing system, right? So again, controlling our movement, designating us to specific spaces. And why is this important? Again, when we talk about integrating the policy conversation as it relates to racism, as it relates to white supremacy, because in 2018, Attica Scott told the world that, let's see if I can read her quote, "I'm going to continue working with my colleagues to get our bills at least heard in committee, particularly in an environment where none of the Black people who are members of the House had any of our bills heard in the 2018 legislative session." So think about that from a socio-political perspective standpoint. Us as Black people, we're engaging in critical conversation within our communities about how important it is to engage in, the political arena, voter engagement, right? And so we're electing those who are speaking the same language that represent what we need and what we want, right? Attica Scott is a representation of that. Charles Booker is a representation of that. And so if we're sending them into policy spaces and the institution of white supremacy being processed through legislation is saying, okay, you're in this space, but we don't give a damn about what you have to say. We don't give a damn about how you want to fight for your community. We will detonate you from the door. We are muting you from the door. This is Kentucky's House of Representatives. And so if that is our reality, how hopeful are we supposed to be in academic spaces? When I'm attempting to write grants, when I'm attempting to engage with young people who are structurally marginalized and plagued with the reality of death as a result of internalized racism, when I'm responsible for writing a dissertation, when I'm responsible for the community rooting for me, saying, yo, Trinidad, we got you, we want you, we need you, finish up. But this is our reality. And again, I talk about within our own institutional space. I'm working on an initiative right now and I introduced the conversation as an exploration of a partnership with the business school to understand how, from a capitalistic perspective, we can structurally pair that with public health, social justice, and understand how we are literally breeding capitalists with business schools around the world, right? And the response to me was, that's not my job. But I'm a Black person saying in this institution, this is what needs to happen. These are some of the critical actions that are necessary from an institutional perspective to move us forward. This was months ago, and now we're having this conversation. I sat with the mayor months ago. He summoned a group of Black men in the community who he deemed as leaders to say, yo, what can we do with the rates of violence that are increasing? What can we do? We need more presence. We need more of your presence. We need more of your help, right? I sat around the table and listened to everyone, all of these Black men in the room, give their answers Some were around programming, you know, some were around just a number of different things that we've been iteratively doing that haven't been producing the type of structural change that we need to see. And so when I shifted the conversation to say, no, Mayor, you were a white man commissioning a group of Black men who are out here. We have a number of initiatives. We have My Brother's Keeper, we have Be Me, we have Black Male Achievement. We have so many initiatives that Black women are leading in this community. We are out here, and we have been out here for decades engaging. What I want to know is, since you, Mayor, have been so rhetorically competent in acknowledging institutional and structural racism, I want to know, where is the alliance of white men who are standing up and saying, this is what we own, right? We're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous. You show up. Hi, my name is Bob, and I'm an alcoholic. You have to understand what it is, and you have to acknowledge it before you can begin to engage in critical action to facilitate change. I need people in power to show up and say, hello, whether it's been intentional or not, I'm a racist. Whether it's been intentional or not, I am a cultural and structural perpetrator of this type of violence. And these are the delineated actions that I am holding myself, as well as my institutions and my communities, accountable to and for, in order to move this forward. That is what I need to see. That is what we need to see as it relates to moving forward in ownership and acknowledgement of structural racism and white supremacy. I'm gonna chill out. I see we got 16 minutes left. And so I know we wanted to save some room for some dialogue from some of the attendees. So an hour conversation is never enough. I'm glad that we are having this. We will continue these conversations additionally associated with action. I will say, prior to me handing it back over, that there are a number of entities, as we talk about from a public health perspective, there are a number of entities that I'm in community with who are needing help, who are needing support, who are needing different types of capital to show up. And there have been a number of white people who have asked me, Trinidad, what can we do? What can we do? And so we have all of the attendees' email addresses. And so I will be sending you information on the Louisville Community Grocery that is, building momentum, the Racial Healing Project that is working with states as well as other private organizations to formalize and operationalize what it means to be an anti-racist organization. Also, the Kentucky Alliance, founded by Ann Braden, Angela Davis, and a number of other people. They're doing work, they're occupying space. They are supporting the bodies that are on the front line protesting as we engage in, these critical moments of fighting against racism and white supremacy. So look out for that information. It will be coming to your inbox. And please, if you're looking for something to do, support these people, support these organizations, and support these spaces.
Trinidad, one thing that has popped up in the chat box is, can you post the Amos Wilson reference? Okay, thank you. All right, so we're what, 10 minutes to go? 15, yeah. We've had a couple of questions sent in. We'll be looking through what you all send this point forward, try and get a few in. Let me toss one out for the two of you to think about. One of the questions asked, what has the university been doing to make things better on campus? We made reference to Neely's document that came out yesterday, but I wonder if either of you want to speak just briefly a little bit more to that question, recognizing that, you've been here 6-8 years is all.
Trinidad, do you want to take that? Or you want me to? You're pointing at me.
Why don't you start, I think, yeah.
Oh, you're typing, okay. What is the university doing? Not enough, honestly. I've been here for 6 years, and granted, I came from Texas A&M, so you know, Trinidad wants a, hello, my name is Monica and I'm a racist. I mean, we worked together for the whole time we've been here. So, I mean, we've had those conversations. I was raised in Texas with all of what that comes with in terms of white supremacist history and policy and assumptions and worldview and all of that. So what is the university doing? I think that this declaration from the president's office has the potential to make some change. I'm not sure, I'm hopeful, I'm not sure to what extent they recognize what that change will have to look like to actually achieve the goal that has been set out. Because a lot of racism exists in the university. A lot of racism exists in academia. A lot of racism exists in the systems and structures that we have that keep students of color out, that keep students of color from being successful in academic programs, that keep them from the same opportunities that white students have, that keep faculty of color. I mean, you want to talk about what is the university doing? It's bleeding faculty of color and has been for the past several years, right? So then that should be the flag to say why. Like, why are Black faculty leaving? And where are they going? And, you know, and what do we need to be doing to make this a safe space for Black bodies, but also a space that what Trinidad's talking about, that actually values what they're bringing to the table in the, you know, I mean, we're about science. So within the science that we do. And I think that there's a lot of ways that, so maybe this isn't answering the question, what is the university doing so much as what does the university need to be doing, is we need to be looking at the ways that racism is embedded in our science, in what we consider knowledge, what we consider evidence, and then how that plays out into policies and practices and the way that we train, students, the way that we train faculty, the way that we train professionals. You know, I mean, it really, the university, if they seriously want to do this, which I hope that that is the case, the university will have to reckon with some very deep structural issues and make big changes, not just to what we teach, but to how we teach, not just to what we research, but to how we research, not just to what kind of service we do, but to how we do it.
I'll add a couple of sentences here. I will echo the general point. Yeah, there's a lot more that needs to happen if we are going to occupy that space that the president is challenging us to do. And I'm pleased that she's calling on us to do that. But for example, we have a chief inclusion and diversity officer, Dr. Faye Jones. She reports directly to the president in a junior title. That needs to change. It needs to be a senior vice president. That is a recognition issue that's just inappropriate. She needs more energy and resources to support her operations. That has to change. If you look at the tiers of employees in the university, people are cringing that maybe you've heard me say this before. There are like 7 tiers: senior leadership, administrative level. Every tier, if you look at the proportion of African-American employees, 8, 10, 15%, things like that. Not horrible, but not what they need to be, what they should be, until you get down to the bottom where you have custodial, grounds maintenance. They're at 70%. Worse still, there are no structural things built into the system to support those people in that bottom tier to advance within the university structure. We are all about creating career trajectory opportunities for people. That's why we exist. Why are we not doing that for our staff? That's a horrible example. There's a lot that needs to be done. We can be optimistic that we have a relatively new leader who is challenging us to do some things. She deserves some time, but there needs to be some action. She's pulled the trigger quickly on a few things that have been problematic, so there's reason to believe that she will. But the proof is in the pudding, so stay tuned and keep leaning on us to get better. We need that pressure from all across the community. Let me push out another thing. There were a number of people that sent in questions related to, if I am not a person of color, how can I become an ally and make meaningful contributions? What advice do you have? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, I will say, there's a wide range of ways to engage. One is to be critical about even that language of being an ally. More so we're looking for in these current times, or accompliceship, right? So in addition to standing in alignment with me, like, what are you doing to risk your resources, to risk your capital on behalf of my human right, on behalf of my humanization, whether that's covertly or overtly. There are a number of visible leaders out here. There are a number of data sources that inform people on what they can do, so reach out. We have published data from our office. We have people like the late Blaine Hudson, who's been doing work. There have been a number of community issues, and there are people literally in the streets who are saying, yo, this is what we need. This is how you can help us. Go to a protest and engage. I said I'll be sending a number of resources thereafter. But the overarching point is to listen to us, listen to Black people as we talk about our lived experiences, as we talk about policy needs, as we talk about economic needs, as we talk about how our communities have been controlled. This is our lived experience. This is also research evidence. This is facts of life. So there are a number of different ways.
All right, let me throw one more out. There was a very pointed question about why is what the university is doing failed to date to say anything about Louisville Police Department. Do we want to comment any more about that? And let me say you got 60 seconds because we're running out of time.
Politics, power, money.
Yeah. I'm not sure to answer the question directly as to why has the university not singled out LMPD and what they're putting out. I mean, I think the president is looking at things from the perspective of, we've got enough to do internally. Let's worry about getting our own house in order. I think there's room for lots of us to be more engaged in that conversation. I mean, I happen to be one of the ones that believes we ought to flush the toilet and start over. That doesn't imply or isn't meant to imply that all police are bad. But I think the only way you're really going to change the kinds of cover-up stuff that occurs there and in lots of other places as well is to really force a total restructure of the whole process. And that's going to be a very big deal. And right now there doesn't seem to be a great deal of support in central administration in Metro Hall for doing that. I think that's the thing that's going to keep people in the streets is we're not getting serious about the fact that those things absolutely have to change. It's nice that we've got Breonna's Law in play. That's a meaningful start. It's not near enough. We need to keep pushing. Let me just see if either one of you want to say anything else real quick, and then I'll make a couple of wrap-up comments, and I'm sure that Marianne and Angela will have a couple of quick things to say as well.
Craig, I just have one more question from the chat that I wanted to pose. From our alumni. Will UofL and the School of Public Health be signing on to the APHA Pledge of Non-Collaboration with the Police Industrial Complex? Furthermore, will it be divesting from LMPD, including researchers at the school and across the university?
Well, what I'll say is, I think defunding is absolutely something that needs to move forward. And, there's about 40% of the population in this country that doesn't know what the hell that means. And, I'm not sure we have the time to educate them. But I think that we absolutely have to pursue those things. We are We are engaged through the Safe City Roundtable here in town and working with Clout, if some of you know Clout, in trying to challenge the police department directly. In a Safe City Roundtable meeting just yesterday, David James invited us to put together a proposal to bring through across his desk to begin championing some of that stuff. You know, I'm not sure that every piece of what's in that APHA doctrine is something that makes sense for us to locally pursue, but in general, I think we're supportive of those principles. So I'm not sure if that adequately answers the question, but I would ask whomever sent that to feel free to follow up with any of the three of us. I don't know, do either of you want to add to that?
Not adding to that, but you asked for if we wanted to, you know, make a remark prior to closing. I just want to emphasize the need for liberation education and pedagogy. You know, so within our academic institutions, within our workspaces, we have to be engaged in education, practices, policies that are centered on liberation education, liberation philosophy. And so I can send some resources for that content as well. But that is key for us to, you know, move forward. If we're ultimately talking about a liberated society, and so our consciousness has to begin there.
All right, thank you, Trinidad. So I hope all of you have invested an hour of your time with us and found these comments useful to you. We here at the school have asked all of our faculty and staff to think of at least one thing that they can do as an individual this year to advance our collective efforts to dismantle systematic racism in our community country. What each chooses to do will be left to them, but we're going to make that a part of their annual review because we want to be certain that that everybody takes this seriously. We're discussing how we're going to engage our students in something parallel. Perhaps we should do that with our alumni as well, because I'm sure that there are a bunch of great alumni out there who are already doing some wonderful things. I encourage each of you to consider how you can help make this time different. Thank you for attending. We apologize for not getting to many of the comments and questions. As Trinidad said, it's an hour is a short period of time, particularly if you have three academics trying to all speak in that period of time. And Trinidad, you do a great job of filling up the time. You'll be wonderful. So again, encourage any of you to feel free to reach out to any three of us as you choose to do so. Stay safe and healthy and vote in November. And let me pass it to Mary Ann for anything she wants to wrap up, or Angela.
Thank you. I really appreciate this response. We had 138 people log on today, which I'm competitive and I like to see numbers. So I think we have maybe made a new record with, let's say, non-athletics engagement in a virtual environment. I will qualify all of those things. And hopefully this will be truly the beginning of more conversations like this. So thank you for spending a full hour with all of us. And I see so many names on here that I know are also really knowledgeable and involved and experienced people. So if there's resources that you want to post to everyone in the chat, I stuck a couple of links to things that Trinidad mentioned, like the Louisville Community Grocery is a fantastic example. I am joining as a member to help, get that, be a part of that and be an active user of that. And, every little bit really does count, but I won't count out the work that is his other full-time job, which is the Youth Violence Prevention Research Center that Monica leads. And those links are all in the chat. So if there's similar organizations, efforts that you want to share with others, throw that in there and we can send that out in a wrap-up email that you all will all get and let us have. It's an opportunity to get feedback after this event. And, you can share further ideas for things that you would like to hear us do in the future along these lines or in a different sphere. So thank you so much. Mary Ann, do you have any other parting housekeeping comments?
I'll just say thank you to all of you for putting this together and helping Louisville Alumni bring this type of content to our virtual engagement series, our opportunities here. I did post in the link. We have some other virtual engagement opportunities coming up. We'd love to have everyone join us for those, including a diversity series that we are launching next month that starts with Dr. Faye Jones, a conversation with her. So That is on August 27th, but you can see our full list of upcoming events in the link I posted in the chat, uoflalumni.org/virtual-engagement. So we hope to see you all there. And other than that, we are good to go. Thank you all for being here with us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.